Is there life without TV?
I don't miss it at all. I'm only too glad of a chance to do other things.
Like renewing old acquaintances?
Meldrew, Victor Meldrew. Oh, God, he was a pillock, wasn't he,
Catching up on DIY. And working on the car.
Do not believe it.
One Foot in the Grave returns. Tonight, 9:30 on BBC1.
Brendel will be on there.
45 people are taken to hospital after a chemical leak. An investigation underway after a Newcastle mail train crashes. The 5-year-old girl who's been given a coral eye. And the former ice cream seller who's now a multi-millionaire. That's a look north on BBC1 in half an hour.
This is BBC One. Now the 6 o'clock news with Martin Lewis and Moira Stewart.
Zepa has fallen to the Bosnian Serbs. The Muslim defenders have abandoned the town. Indicted as war criminals, the Bosnian Serb leaders Radovan Karadic and General Mladic. An explosion on a Paris regional subway kills at least 3 people and injures many more. The Greenbury Committee again asks the Treasury to rethink its tax on share options. And who took the money dropped by the Irish robber on the run? Good evening. The Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadic and his army commander Ratko Mladic have been indicted for war crimes. The Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal says the two have been indicted for genocide and crimes against humanity arising from atrocities perpetrated against civilians throughout Bosnia-Herzegovina. Meanwhile, aid agencies in Bosnia are preparing for thousands more refugees after the Bosnian Serbs' capture of yet another so-called safe area, the town of Zepa. After a series of conflicting reports, a UN team there has confirmed that Serb forces now control the town. The UN has been negotiating with the Serbs on how to evacuate civilians from the enclave. 17,000 Muslims were besieged in Zepa. 79 Ukrainian UN peacekeepers there have retreated to their main base just outside the town, and about 1,000 Bosnian government troops have retreated to the surrounding area.
The capture of Zepa is General Ratko Mladic's latest military triumph. A week ago, Bosnian Serb TV broadcast these pictures of what were supposed to be surrender talks to back up premature Serb claims that they had taken the enclave. Now the UN says the general has finally done it. On the day its own human rights tribunal indicted him and Radovan Karadic, the Bosnian Serb leader, for genocide and crimes against humanity. Both men are being held responsible for atrocities against civilians and for taking hostage UN personnel. But despite that, the UN is still negotiating with them to rescue civilians from Zepa.
We will get a ruling on that from the UN in New York, I am sure. In the meantime, we would take the view that it is better that this dialogue goes on in the interests of what is happening out there than it to be cut at this stage.
Haris Salajic, the Bosnian Prime Minister, wants Western governments to do more than deplore war crimes. He wants them to take sides.
The genocide is going on right now in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The problem is that the Western government would not recognize that fact, would not invoke the Genocide Geneva Convention, because it entails some responsibility and some obligation.
To avoid a repeat of the scenes that followed the fall of Srebrenica, he wants UN protection for refugees from Zepa. The UN now has documented evidence of attacks on refugees from Srebrenica by Serb soldiers, which have been passed on to the International War Crimes Tribunal. This morning, the UN spokesman read extracts from the file.
A number of those interviewed reported seeing between 6-10 bodies of people who had been executed by having their throats cut. Persons evacuated on the convoy also have given statements relating to young women being forcibly taken from the displaced persons by Serb soldiers.
In Zenica in central Bosnia, the UN is preparing supplies to avoid what it has called a humanitarian catastrophe. They hope they'll be ready for what looks like the certainty of a huge influx of refugees from Zepa. And with French troops now alongside the British on Mount Igman above Sarajevo, the UN's own security is much improved. The Bosnians are waiting to see if the foreign soldiers can do the same for them. Now that Zepa has gone, the enclave of B Hatch is the UN safe area most at risk. It's probably where the UN's resolve will next be tested. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
NATO leaders meeting in Brussels are still deciding who should order future airstrikes in Bosnia and why. The British and French haven't been able to agree with the Americans on the extent UN commanders should be involved.
NATO warplanes were being prepared today for their new, more aggressive role in Bosnia. But whose orders are the pilots of these planes supposed to obey? The Americans want NATO to be in command of any future airstrikes, ending the cumbersome dual key system in which there has to be UN political approval as well. But Britain and France, as troop-contributing nations, insist the UN must still have a proper say. So, NATO officials arriving at last for a twice-postponed meeting in Brussels today have to come up with a compromise, and it's likely to mean giving more power to both NATO and UN commanders on the ground. Whatever the squabbles, though, Washington is still trying to talk tough to the Bosnian Serb general Ratko Mladic.
Justice Saddam Hussein should have had no doubt in 1990 and 91 that when the United States says we are going to unleash substantial and decisive air power against him, we mean it.
For President Clinton, it's crucial the new threat of airstrikes is credible. He knows it may be the only way to stop congressional leaders abandoning the Bosnian arms embargo. He also knows that time is running out because Congress debates the issue tonight.
All we're suggesting is to give these people a right to defend themselves as they have under Article 51 of the UN Charter.
Already, Islamic nations, which have been busy fundraising for the Bosnian Muslims, have declared the arms embargo invalid. So money like this could soon start buying a flood of guns and ammunition for the Bosnian government. Whatever the American Congress decides, therefore, the arms embargo may be about to collapse anyway. Ben Brown, BBC News.
Members of the Greenbury Committee have had talks with the Treasury Minister Michael Jack over plans to levy income tax on employee share options. The Treasury said there had been helpful clarification of the committee's views. The committee said its recommendation to end favourable tax treatment on share options was intended to apply only to executives and senior directors.
While his junior minister was deep in discussions with the Greenbury team, the Chancellor himself arrived at the Treasury. Minutes later, the captains of industry left, sweeping imperiously past the waiting press without revealing their latest thoughts on the share options debacle. The Treasury said the exchanges had been cordial, and ministers welcomed the fact Sir Richard Greenbury had reaffirmed his committee's recommendations. In an interview earlier, the Chancellor seemed to be sticking to his guns.
Yeah, I think these should be subject to income tax. I think most people think they should. I have no views on share options except they are an extremely valuable way of rewarding people for their performance if they're done properly. And many share options are already taxed as I propose. The details have to be settled and will be settled when we get to the finance bill. I'm prepared to listen to any sensible views on the subject.
The head of the Institute of Directors, Tim Melville-Ross, urged the Chancellor to perform a delicate U-turn. Opposition politicians agreed.
But what is clear is it's got to be decided on two principles. First of all, we've got to deal with the abuses in the privatised boardrooms, and we cannot let these go unscathed. And secondly, as I've been saying all along, we've got to encourage rather than discourage employee share ownership all round.
Well, the Chancellor can't opt out of his responsibility to take tax decisions. It's not up to the Greenbury Committee, it's up to him. He doesn't have a parliamentary majority for the changes he's announced. He's going to have to change them, and he's got to make sure that he doesn't penalise ordinary workers who are given genuine share option schemes.
It was the revelation that even checkout staff at the Asda supermarket chain would be caught by income tax that has infuriated the business community. Asda's chairman says it's unfair.
I think they feel very let down. They feel let down at the moment by this government and let down by the Chancellor. They believe, like us, that wider share ownership was one of the government objectives. But we still believe that. And we're looking now for a change in the Chancellor's intentions to enable these people, ordinary working people, to hold on to the gains that they will make, modest gains, as a result of their hard work with the company.
Later this evening, the ASDA boss will be coming here to give his views direct to the Chancellor. His message will be simple. No income tax change, which leaves the low-paid worse off, can possibly be fair. John Fryer, BBC News, at the Treasury.
3 people have been killed and at least 16 injured in an explosion on the Paris Underground train system. In the last few minutes, Paris's official prosecutor's office has said it was caused by a bomb. The explosion happened at Saint-Michel station near Notre Dame. 10 of the wounded are reported to be in a serious condition. One witness said the blast had occurred on the RER Express train. Police have sealed off the area and anti-terrorist investigators are at the scene. We'll bring you more as soon as we get it.
Consumer groups say the poor and elderly could face big increases in telephone bills under new plans announced by the industry regulator today. Oftel says it will allow British Telecom to raise line rents by as much as it wants. It says the move will provide more competition within the phone industry.
Every year, BT's domestic customers pay about £80 each to cover the cost of maintaining and updating the phone system. At the moment, BT is prevented from raising that charge by more than 2% above the rate of inflation. But now that's changing. The typical quarterly domestic phone bill is about £52.68. Of that, £7.85 is VAT and £23.74 is the charge for calls. BT is still obliged to cut call charges by inflation minus 7.5% every year. The line rental is £21.09. There's now no restriction on increasing this element of the bill. The decision has been made by the regulator of the telecommunications industry.
There's one constraint, which is the restriction on how they can change line rental prices, which it's in everybody's interests, customers in particular, that we get rid of now, because that would help competitors, it would help investment, and it will help consumers.
But there are worries among those who depend on the phone as a lifeline. Françoise Montford campaigns for the disabled.
I just hope, as I said, that BT will think about not increasing the charges. If anything, I would like them to take away the line charge to disabled people and elderly people.
BT says that bills for most people will continue to fall, but those who don't use the phone often could end up paying more.
If you use your phone less than others, your bills will not fall as quickly as others, and in some cases may actually increase.
Tomorrow, BT, which still controls well over 90% of the domestic telephone market, is expected to announce profits equivalent to more than £100 a second. Now, a large part of its revenue will not be subject to strict price control. Greg Wood, BBC News.
Scientific research is showing a growing problem with male fertility. Sperm counts in men appear to have fallen sharply since the Second World War, and the rate of testicular cancer is rising. Scientists believe it could be linked to modern plastics and chemicals, some of which may block male hormones. Ministers say they'll act if the link can be proved.
Sperm counts are falling, some scientists say by as much as 50% in 50 years. They've also observed a deterioration in quality. More men produce malformed sperm, which can't function effectively. Chemical pollution is thought to be to blame.
If we can identify chemicals which are contributing to this problem, then of course these chemicals will be regulated and removed from the environment so that we can do something about the problem.
Food and its packaging may be one possible cause, but with more than 2,000 chemicals capable of damaging male reproduction in common industrial use, time is short to discover which are responsible.
We need to get answers as quickly as we can, because they aren't going to be easy answers, and they are not going to arrive tomorrow. They are going to take a bit of searching out, but I think it's really rather important that we get those answers, and as quickly as possible.
And there's other reproductive damage that's triggered by chemical pollution. When Bob Champion won the 1981 Grand National, he proved to the world he'd also beaten testicular cancer. There's been a 300% increase in the disease in just 30 years. It's a subject most men find embarrassing.
You've got to keep looking at yourselves, as you know now that it is on the up.
A bigger percentage of men are getting it. You've got to look at your body. I think men are too macho and they think nothing's going to happen to them, but it does.
And yesterday's miracle chemicals can be today's damaging pollution. Exposure in the womb to pesticides banned a generation ago may only now be making itself felt. Richard Wilson, BBC News.
An all-party group of MPs has criticised the government for failing to compensate people whose homes were blighted by plans for the Channel Tunnel rail link. Earlier this year, the Parliamentary Ombudsman backed complaints from some homeowners. Today, the MPs said the Department of Transport had no excuse for not considering compensation.
5 years ago, when the Transport Department announced an indefinite delay to its Channel Tunnel rail link plans because the city couldn't raise enough private cash, it said the proposed route would be further considered. The Ombudsman said the resulting uncertainty caused generalised blight in Kent because no one knew where the line would run. Among those hit were Ron and Enid Howard, who'd been trying to sell their house in Boxley.
We found it impossible to sell our house on the open market. So we asked British Rail if they would buy it. British Rail refused, so we took it to the Ombudsman.
The Ombudsman decided the Transport Department's maladministration meant 5 cases of exceptional suffering merited compensation. Normally, what he says goes. But in February, the Transport Department rejected his ruling as opening the way to any number of claims. These could possibly exceed £1 billion, as theoretically it could apply to any public project. Today's Select Committee report is a stinging rebuke. It says it would be most regrettable if the Transport Department remains obdurate in not paying compensation. And if it doesn't back down, there should be an urgent Commons debate.
We are very concerned about the Department of Transport and the way in which it is handling blight as it relates to the Channel Tunnel. Now, we believe that there is a substantial degree of blight which exists, and we believe that there are some exceptional cases contained within that blight.
But while the Select Committee thinks only a few property owners will be affected by the ruling, others say it must also apply to people living near planned bypasses and motorways.
People who live anywhere near to a road that's been designated for improvement find it very difficult to dispose of their homes if they have to sell them until the final route is announced.
This morning, the Transport Secretary, Sir George Young, insisted that it's government policy not to compensate property owners hit by generalised blight, and he denied that there'd been maladministration, but he's agreed to look again at the issues involved. Christopher Wayne, BBC News.
The time is just coming up to 17 minutes past 6. Coming up next, motorists demand a code of conduct for overzealous traffic wardens.
The little girl who's been given a glass eye made out of ocean coral.
And why the Irish police want to question the people who helped themselves to a robber's cash.
The AA is calling for legal controls on overzealous traffic wardens. They say car drivers are being treated unfairly by some local authorities who've taken over parking control from the police. The association wants to see a code of conduct introduced before more councils follow suit.
A sight to strike dismay into motorists, and one which Londoners have been growing more used to. Since the councils took over parking enforcement from the police, there's been more ticketing and more towing away. And one motoring organisation thinks the local authorities haven't been playing fair.
What we want to make sure is that when this parking system spreads throughout the country, motorists in our towns and cities don't have the same problems that motorists in London have had. And that's why we want the statutory code of conduct, so that councils aren't getting away with mistreating motorists.
A view that's echoed on the street.
I just think it's amazing that a law-abiding citizen gets this sort of treatment. You know, somebody living, paying their rates, going about their business. I just think it's absolutely ghastly.
You know, you stop, you have a bite to eat and a cup of tea, and you're sitting opposite your cab and they say, take it away now, and you say, I'll be a minute. You haven't got a minute, take it away now.
Lothian is one council which has decided in principle to take over parking enforcement in Edinburgh. They think they'll be able to manage the city's parking problems better that way, and they'll find a use for the money raised.
There's money, for example, which currently goes in fines straight into the Treasury and doesn't have any local impact. Now, quite clearly, if that money can come back, it will assist in the enforcement of the system, and it will allow us to think about doing things which are currently unfundable.
Motorists around the country may soon face tougher parking policies enforced by local councils. The councils say that's just the price to be paid to make the traffic run smoothly, because one person's quick stop on a yellow line soon becomes someone else's jam.
Before the London boroughs took on the enforcement role, there was so much illegal parking leading to congestion, leading to accidents. Only one illegal parking act in 50 ever got caught, and that has had to change in order to make things better for every road user.
Councils will have to find the correct balance between enforcement and being fair to the motorist, and the traffic wardens will soon be told if they've got it wrong. Andrew Bell, BBC News.
The management of London Transport is applying for a High Court injunction to stop tube drivers from going on strike. Talks aimed at averting Thursday's 24-hour stoppage on the Underground have broken down without agreement. The management has increased its pay offer to 3% and insists that's final. Negotiators from the two unions involved, the RMT and ASLEF, described the increase as only a small improvement and said the strike was still set to go ahead. They will refer the offer to their executives tomorrow.
The Manchester Royal Eye Hospital is pioneering a new technique in Europe, making artificial eyes out of sea coral. A 5-year-old girl from North Shields has become the latest patient to benefit from the technique, which gives the eye natural movement and reduces the risk of rejection.
Amanda Hopkins is one of the youngest people to have the pioneering treatment. She lost her left eye when a child threw a broken tile at her. Surgeons could not restore the sight in that eye, but an implant made of ocean coral enables her replacement eye to move naturally.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's like a living part of our body now, you know, like a shade grows, the eye grows, so there's no more operations, and it's really good.
Because coral resembles human bone, once it's placed in the eye socket, blood and tissue grow over it, and then the replacement eye can be attached to it with a peg.
The artificial eye then fits over the top of the coral and is able then to be moved by the piece of coral behind. And of course, once the peg is in, we get even more definite movement, so that every tiny little movement is reproduced accurately.
Manchester Eye Hospital has carried out 150 of the coral implants in the past 18 months. The treatment is expensive, but in Amanda's case, it's thought her body will adapt to the coral as she grows, so she may never need more surgery. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
The political big guns have opened up in Littleborough and Saddleworth for the final days of the by-election campaign. The Chancellor launched an airborne assault, arriving by helicopter, while on the ground the Labour and Liberal Democrat leaders exchanged fire over whose candidate would emerge bloody but victorious this Thursday.
Labour are beginning to think even if they don't win here, they can't lose. Feeling almost certain now of second place or better, Tony Blair arrived at the old mill that acts as his party's temporary headquarters. In the sky, a faint dot was the Chancellor, also here. Opponents scoffed at the Conservatives allowing a camera to film Kenneth Clarke like this when their campaign has been criticised for not making contact with the people. But he did have the best answer yet to the most frequent jibe local Tories have suffered.
You've run a pretty low-key campaign here, haven't you?
Doesn't seem very low-key to me, surrounded by all these people getting out of a helicopter, which I think Michael Heseltine's coming in as well on, and this afternoon you seem to have had half the cabinet here.
Not to mention the Liberal Democrat leader, still looking favourite to win, despite talk of a behind-the-scenes panic caused by Labour. Mr Ashdown says only his party is giving straight answers on issues like rail privatisation and education.
If you vote for anything else, you risk waking up on Friday morning with a Conservative Member of Parliament for Littleborough and Saddleworth, and Mr Major claiming that the Littleborough and Saddleworth people have spoken for the people of Britain in endorsing his government.
Mr Blair's strategists said they were pleased that out on the streets, local residents did not look away from him, apparently one way of measuring by-election support.
It's going extremely well. This is now a race between New Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and with the Tories out of it, I'm making a direct appeal to people to make a difference, to vote for the strong choice and a new beginning under Labour.
Now it's all about switching, each party claiming voters who've already made commitments are coming across to them. The big puzzle of the by-election is the size of the Tory core vote. The deployment of the government big guns today shows the Conservatives believe their lifelong supporters here will stave off humiliation. Jeremy Vine, BBC News, Littleborough and Saddleworth.
There are 10 candidates standing in the Littleborough and Saddleworth by-election. The vote this Thursday follows the death of the Conservative MP Geoffrey Dickens, who had a majority of almost 4,500 at the last election.
We're going back to that bomb on an underground train in Paris. In the past few minutes, the French Prime Minister has told reporters at the scene that at least 4 people have been killed and 40 injured in the blast. June Kelly has been monitoring the latest pictures from Paris.
The blast happened at the height of the evening rush hour at the Saint-Michel station near Notre Dame Cathedral. The explosion ripped through the underground train, which burst into flames. Among the injured, many were seriously hurt. Some had to be cut free from the wreckage. As the police arrived in force, an investigation into the cause of the explosion had begun. A short time ago, the prosecutor's office in Paris confirmed that it was a bomb. No group has yet admitted responsibility. The train was packed with commuters heading to the southern area of Saint-Rémy-lès-Chevreuse. It was running on the RER network, which crisscrosses Paris and then heads out to the suburbs. The station is at the heart of one of Paris's most popular tourist areas, one of the reasons perhaps why it was targeted by the bombers. June Kelly, BBC News.
And I'm joined now by our Paris correspondent Kevin Connolly. Kevin, what's the latest?
The latest is, of course, that the scene there is still sealed off. Police are still carrying out the extraordinarily delicate task of bringing up the bodies of the injured, and they fear perhaps more dead. We now know, as you say, that 4 people have been killed. But it can't be stressed enough, of course, that still scenes of great chaos and confusion. Eyewitnesses speak of a blast from inside a train ripping through the station, plunging it into darkness, and then of there being scenes of absolute panic as people try to flee. So it will be some time before we establish exactly what happened.
There is one report that it was a bomb. Has that been confirmed?
That report, in fact, comes from public prosecutors at the scene, so I think we can rely on it. Some witnesses spoke in those terrifying few seconds after the blast of smelling gunpowder hanging in the air of the station as they fled, and of fires burning there as well. So, although that is just an initial report, it does seem to be a report on which we can rely.
Is it too early to say who the finger of suspicion will be pointing at?
Well, unofficially, we are being told here, of course, that the first police line of investigation will be that there's some possible connection with the war in Algeria between the Algerian government, backed by France, and Muslim fundamentalists there. It's always been the fear of the French authorities that that battle would one day spill over onto the streets of Paris. Now they are thinking privately already that perhaps this is a sign that it has.
Kevin, thanks very much indeed.
The police in Dublin are still questioning a man about a bank raid in the city centre that ended in chaos. The police got their man, but didn't get all the money. The dramatic pictures were captured by a camera crew who happened to be filming in the area at the time.
Dublin's fair city looked more like Dodge City at lunchtime. Armed police in hot pursuit of a lone gunman after a raid on a nearby bank.
A man came out of the bank, he had a gun in his hand and he just looked and he put it up slightly, and when he seen the squad car he just ran out.
The man crisscrossed O'Connell Street with armed detectives at his heels. Then things went horribly wrong in the middle of the widest main thoroughfare in Europe. Crisp new banknotes began to fountain from the man's trouser leg, blowing across the street while the chase continued. Amid the pandemonium, the cash windfall was being gathered for police by pedestrians, though one youth needed some persuading that honesty has its own reward. By now, armed detectives of the elite Cobra squad had drawn their guns and joined the chase. Panic-stricken, the man darted into the city's oldest department store and terrified bargain hunters as he ran through cosmetics, woolen goods and lingerie before being cornered at ladies' handbags. So the game was up, and the gun, it turns out, was a fake. But police say the suspect could have been killed, citing recent similar cases in Britain. And the moral of the story, of course, is that crime does not pay. Or does it? Police are still searching for a passer-by who did not return several £100. Leo Enright, BBC News, Dublin.
And tonight's main headline again, A bomb on a Paris regional subway train has killed 4 people and injured 40 more. There will be more, of course, on that in the next national news, which is the 9 o'clock news.
From Martin and me, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Well, it's been quite a hot day once again with a lot of sunshine around. Maybe not as humid as it was, but that humidity is on the way up, and with it, this time, thunderstorms. Throughout the day we've been watching this curl of cloud, this depression in the Bay of Biscay, moving slowly northwards. It's a classic situation. There's thundery rain in there. It's all heading slowly north amongst very humid air. Thunderstorms have been very frequent just recently. As you can see, this is something like the last quarter of an hour. Frequent reports of thunderstorms running in towards the northwest of France. There are others elsewhere in Europe, but this is the band we're looking at. Discrete band of sometimes pretty heavy rain, and all of it drifting slowly northwards. This evening then should see the rain, maybe before dark, just touching towards Cornwall, in towards the Channel Isles. It won't be persistent, but I think you'll see the lightning from it. It's been fairly windy, as I say, and it will remain windy just ahead of this band of thundery rain throughout the evening, which is good, I suppose, because it takes the sting out of the heat. There's the picture then from space. If I clear away the cloud, it's slightly less complicated, but we're going to bring this curl of cloud up tomorrow, and with it, central and southern England could get some much wanted rain. Overnight then, that rain creeps in very slowly. It'll be sporadic, as I say, it's not going to be persistent, and it moves in across much of southwest England, just touching South Wales. With it, very high humidity, so quite a muggy and continuing windy night in the south. Not that cool elsewhere either. The wind's been quite a stiff easterly. Now throughout the rest of the 24 hours we'll get quite a breeze onto this coast, and it'll all tend to turn round to the south, and after the rain's gone through the southwest, so the wind will tend to become a lot lighter. So, morning cloud then, moving in towards central southern England and South Wales. Cloud tend to be rather more persistent up the east coast than it has been today as the wind picks up, otherwise a lot of hot sunshine. And by the afternoon, well the end of the afternoon really, outbreaks of thundery rain could be anywhere from North Wales across to Wales to East Anglia, and even drifting up towards Northern Ireland. And as is the nature of these showers, some places will get wet, some will remain dry, which I think at the moment is unfortunate. So Goodwood may not be quite so glorious, I think, tomorrow. Temperatures, well, pretty high, very hot, in fact very humid just ahead of the thundery weather, slightly cooler behind it, but hot in many other places. And on Thursday the rain is a little bit further north.
Tomorrow, into the war zone with the Royal Navy.
If it flies, it dies.
Active service with HMS Brilliant, tomorrow at 9:30 on BBC1.
They hunt the highlands. They track in a terrain that's as barren as it's wild. Friend and foe to the wildlife they nurture. Masters of Gaelic custom handed down through the generations. A traditional community in an unspoilt landscape. Discover the spirit of the hunting man. The Gamekeeper. Friday, 7:30 on BBC1.
Leslie Phillips and Ruthie Henschel get a grilling from Mike Smith in half an hour in the celebrity quiz, That's Showbusiness.
This is BBC1 in the North. Now look north with Mike Neville.
Tonight, 40 factory workers and 5 fire officers have been taken to hospital after a chemical leak. Also, a Newcastle-bound mail train crashes near York, seriously injuring the driver. The 5-year-old girl from North Shields who's been given an eye made out of coral. And we discover how a former ice cream seller from Darlington became a multi-millionaire. Later in the programme, we'll hear the latest from New York, where Odell Smith from Stockton and Cleveland was due to have an operation tomorrow on the tumour on her spine. Health and safety officials are investigating what caused a dangerous leak of chlorine gas into a County Durham factory. 45 people were taken to hospital, 5 have been detained overnight. The owners of a tanker which was collecting chemicals from the professional liquid products at Concert say they're checking to see if the correct substances were being pumped into their vehicle. Chris Jackson reports.
Most of the 37 workers were allowed home this afternoon. After several hours' observation, the hospital gave them the all clear, but they were told to keep a check on their breathing for another 36 hours.
Just dizzy, no nausea, and that's about, you know, really.
And what treatment did you receive?
Just sort of gas in there to, you know, calm us down first. We did an oxygen count on us later on to see if I, you know, I'm not quite sure exactly what I had. I don't know all the terms and everything for everything, you know.
Back to work tomorrow?
Hope so, yeah.
This morning, fire crews were called when a cloud of gas escaped into the factory on the Concert No. 1 trading estate. It happened as a tanker was loading up at the plant which makes bleach. 5 firefighters were among those taken to hospital. Neighbouring businesses were told to close their windows until the alert was over.
Well, a lot of people were coming out from that end, which is the factory end, coughing, spluttering. Apparently one of the van drivers was nearly vomiting.
The tanker company says it had been asked to dispose of a chemical at short notice, and it will be checking to see if the chemical loaded into the vehicle was that which they were expecting. The only certainty is that the gas that was given off was chlorine.
Chlorine can be an extremely dangerous gas. Indeed, in some circumstances it can prove fatal. However, our understanding is that the casualties that did present to us were reasonably likely contaminated.
This afternoon the factory was closed and health and safety officials were unable to begin their inquiry because all the staff and managers had been taken to casualty. The company this afternoon issued a short statement.
At 11:30 this morning, an incident occurred at the entrance to our factory. At that entrance, hazardous fumes were generated, and these entered the factory premises. The factory was immediately evacuated, and the emergency services were called, in line with our normal procedures. The cause of the incident is still to be investigated, and until that investigation is completed, no further comment can be made.
It was an incident which had the potential to be a lot worse. Tonight, 5 people have been detained in Shottybridge Hospital. Although they are obviously still suffering the effects of the chlorine gas, doctors say they're only being kept in as a precaution.
Rail accident investigators have spent the day searching for clues after last night's train crash in North Yorkshire.